Morning.
Morning.
Where shall I put it?
Down your end.
Bit chilly this morning?
Still, we mustn't complain.
That was no devil. She spoke with her own voice, the voice of a frustrated woman. That's enough.
Do not be so easily deceived. A very innocence is a sham. A mask of deceit devised by the cunning of Satan. Be assured, the fiend is silently lurking in some hidden recess of her body. This medical examination will reveal, and then we shall do battle.
Be advised that the following podcast can and will contain spoilers. It is highly recommended that you watch both films under discussion before listening. Thank you. Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode number 28 of the Movie Club podcast, a podcast which works kind of like a book club. We've selected a couple movies in advance. We gather a few people around the internet at our little virtual table, and we talk about these movies for a little while. We're right in the middle of October right now, so this, I guess you could consider to be our horror episode, but breaking with what is maybe the normal theme of Halloween with ghosts and ghouls, we're going to instead settle with psychological moral horror. So we're just going to play things a little differently here. We have Ken Russell's 1971 political Christian period piece, The Devils, and we have Andrei Sulawski's relationship meltdown / creature feature, Possession. Joining me at the table,
Tom Clift of the internet. I'm kind of all over the place, but I'm on Twitter at Tom_Clift.
And I'm Bob Turnbull, write for Row3.com, as well as my own blog, Eternal Sunshine of the Logical Mind, and I'm at The Logical Mind on Twitter.
Matthew Price of the Mammo podcast, which you can find at mammo.ca, also distributed on Row3, and you can also find me on Twitter at Matt Movies, M-A-T-T Movies.
And I am Kurt Halfyard. I'm also at Row3. You can often find me writing for Twitch Film and on podcasts Hither and Yon. And I can be found on Twitter at Triflic, Triflic. So welcome, everybody. It's glad to have all of you back. Bob and Price are veterans, both of the most recent show and others. And Tom, I don't believe we've had you before, so welcome.
We've tried. We've tried.
Yeah, this is my first successful appearance on the podcast. Yeah, it's great to be here.
That's okay. Tom, I've been on it before, but none have been successful, so...
So let's kick off with Ken Russell's The Devils. So the movie is set in the mid-1600s in Loudun, France, as the Catholic Church is just coming off of a massive war with the Protestant Church. Richelieu, the Catholic bishop, is looking to maintain his political dominance, and he tangles, or at least exerts, some allegations on a promiscuous priest in Loudun in the efforts to knock down its walls, and seizes on the opportunity from a particular nun in a, I'm going to get this wrong, but I'm going to say Ursuline convent, who has a thing for this particular bishop, or sorry, is his name Grandier, or is that his title?
That's his name.
Urban Grandier, played by Oliver Reed. The nun is played by Vanessa Redgrave. Because she has a particular sexual obsession with them, she has convinced herself, or is willing to convince others, that he has taken advantage of her and her fellow nuns and come into the form of her as a devil. And with bombastic approach, they attempt to bring this priest down as he kind of finds his own purpose in life and saintliness as he undergoes his downfall. I don't know if that adequately explains the movie. There's actually quite a bit of spirituality, politics, and horrific things going on. It's kind of a dense film. And I will go around the table again. And tell me how you first came to this film, if this podcast was the first time you saw it, whether you've seen it multiple times, and what your initial thoughts were. Go ahead, Tom.
So this was the first time I'd seen the film. It's actually the first time I'd seen both of the films we're discussing today. And the version of the film I saw was the uncut version. I assume it's the complete version of the film. I understand there were a ton of different cuts, and that the film, when it first came out, was pretty heavily censored, both in the UK and then even more so in North America. And certainly the version that I saw had plenty of material that could easily have caught the eye of censors back in the day.
Yeah, first time for me as well. Been wanting to see it for years and just never got around to it. So this was a nice kick in the butt to finally see it. I saw the 108-minute version, so I'm not sure if that's the uncut or if I missed a couple of minutes in there. Certainly still enough to censor and rattle the nerves a good 40 years ago. Fantastic, though. We'll get to that, but I absolutely loved it.
My first time as well, although it wasn't a movie that I was dying to see for years. I'd certainly heard of it, and I'm woefully underserved on sort of all the early Ken Russell stuff, so I hadn't gotten to it yet, just like I haven't gotten to Sons and Lovers and a bunch of other films that I'd still like to get to. I don't know. I was dumb enough not to note the running time of the film I saw. It didn't seem particularly censored in the version that I saw. I saw the version that was available to rent on DVD from my local video shop, but I imagine that it's mostly intact from what I could see.
This is, I guess, this is my third time watching the film. I suggested the film because it kind of recently in the last couple of years has gotten a bit of a re-emerging into popular culture because the BFI managed to get the bulk of the film and restore it. They did not put it out on Blu-ray, unfortunately, because Warner Brothers would not give them the high-def elements. They just gave them a digibeta version. Warner Brothers seems to have had a hard-on for not releasing this film properly. And to the best of my knowledge, outside of the bootleg that I have, I don't think the full uncut version exists in any legal format at the moment. I mean, I guess the one element of whether or not you saw the least censored version is when when the nuns pull down the statue of Jesus and proceed to smother him in a sexual fashion, if you will. There's this kind of zooming in, like a SCTV Dr. Tongues kind of zoom.
I was in there. Yep.
And that scene is cut from most versions of the film. But anyway, I enjoy the heck out of the movie. It's just stunningly beautiful, and it is dense enough that it certainly stands up to multiple viewings. You can always get something new and interesting out of it each time you watch it.
And I think it's also really, really clear in its message, too. I mean, there was no point in the movie where I was starting to wonder, what are they talking about? What background am I unaware of? I thought it was extremely clear what he was going for. Without being subtle in any way, shape, or fashion, which I greatly enjoyed because he absolutely went for it in pretty much every single scene. Sorry, Matt, I cut you off there.
Oh, it's okay. I just wanted to say that your recap description of it just at the top of the episode, where you kind of laid out in like the plot just in point by point. In my head, I was like, "Oh, that's what happened." So. I'm not sure that it is. I mean, it's certainly as clear and unclear as kind of all Ken Russell stuff is for me, which is to say that he's very much somebody that strikes me as being much more in love with the images than he is with any kind of interest in telling any kind of linear story. I don't think the story's particularly compellingly linear. I think it functions better as a kind of cultural artifact than it does as a film.
It's interesting that you got that different response from it, Matt, because I've seen a few other Ken Russell movies, and I totally agree with you on the rest of them. Even though I like them, he's much more concerned with the visuals.
I love
and even though he is here too,
but that thing makes no sense. Not a lick.
Sorry, which one?
Track 29.
Oh, I haven't seen
The
that.
one with Gary Oldman and Teresa Russell? That movie makes no sense. Anyway, we'll go back to this. Sorry.
I look forward to seeing that. Yeah, I just seen The Lair of the White Worm recently, and I think his first movie, Billion Dollar Brain, which is somewhat straightforward.
Tom, what did you think?
I mean, from my perspective, I didn't really have trouble following it in terms of a point A to point B plot, sort of narratively what's happening. It was sort of fairly clear to me, and especially given that I understood there's a lot of, there's clearly a lot of history to it, and the film begins with this disclaimer, this is based on real events that all happened, which is always kind of, you're always slightly skeptical when you see that. But in terms of what was happening, I was pretty clear on. It's definitely, I do agree, very much concerned with kind of the imagery, and there are plenty of sort of dream sequences and people having visions and so on. But I think I was mostly able to follow what was going on, and I think sounds like most people, I really, really liked it. It was completely in the sort of stuff I'm interested in, the intersection between religion and politics and zealotry and how it can be used to persecute people. So yeah, I dug the film.
The thing that I find very interesting with this film is that a lot of it is very, well, I guess theatrically absurd. I mean, it opens with the King of France putting on a play, and the way that a lot of the dialogue is delivered, whether it's in public forums or in court trials or whatnot. But then, if you watch Oliver Reed, who is one of kind of he's kind of like a big, both physically in stature, but also a big performer, and always has this kind of dominating of the screen. You actually see his performance become more restrained as the movie goes by, as he kind of becomes a more serene, grounded figure. At the beginning, he's this promiscuous priest who just coldly shuts down his mistress when she announces that she's pregnant, and he gets himself in a fair bit of trouble and even confesses to almost like a death wish by all of his sexual promiscuities and whatnot. There's a scene which is so endearing to me where he approaches these two, they almost feel like Shakespearean bit players, these two doctors, as they're administering some medicine to a plague victim, and they have a crocodile, like a full crocodile stuffed under the bed, and he comes in and he just has that wonderful line, "What fresh lunacy is this?" And he grabs the crocodile and proceeds to have a sword fight with the crocodile in the middle of the movie. I know on my first viewing, because it's fairly early on that happens in the film, my thought was, what did I just get myself into?
And the best part about that is that their reaction is, "Hey man, that thing was expensive." that's their concern. Hey, I paid a lot of money for that crocodile.
One of the things that really struck me about the film, especially in that first kind of the first act, was just what an absolute scumbag the lead character is. He's not morally ambiguous so much as just a really sleazy, pervy, just a really unpleasant person. But he's not even necessarily an anti-hero, because he's clearly the person we're meant to be rooting for, and he absolutely represents good in this kind of political, religious battle. But just as a human being, he's so unpleasant that I was really fascinated by that.
Yeah, I love that too. I mean, he's obviously a very flawed character with his good and bad points, and certainly throughout the movie, even tries to redeem himself for some of the bad things he's done in the past. But I love that sense of humor that pops up too. I mean, I mentioned before that it's very linear in many ways, but then you have these moments of absurdity when the king is shooting the blackbirds, who are actually, I think, Protestants dressed up in these big bird costumes.
Yes.
And when he shoots the final one, he actually says, "Bye-bye, blackbird," which is absolutely silly and makes no sense, but is kind of wonderful in showing how the king has absolutely no respect for that set of people as well.
There's a lot of, I don't think this is too big a stretch to say, there's a fair amount of almost Monty Python level satirical silliness running through.
Yeah.
Apart from the fact that it's very hard to watch dead bodies get piled on a cart and not laugh.
Absolutely.
Really, that is gold, comedy gold. You don't even have to be playing it for laughs. It's always funny now when they throw dead bodies on a cart. But even apart from that, like the blackbirds and all that other stuff, there is a sense of like it almost feels like sketch comedy to some degree. Like it's also like the Bye Bye Blackbird thing is so clearly out of time and a totally self-acknowledged anachronism about. He's just talking directly to the viewers through a lot of the film.
It actually hides the exceptionally effective, or I think smart strategy that he's cutting that sequence, the fake hunt with the king on one hand, with Grandier's big speech where he's really rallying the town to this real political problem that they're going to have to face. And so on one hand, you have one of the most serious scenes in the film of Grandier rallying the townspeople, cut with the most absurd thing. And it kind of gets at to the fact that where you have a lot of people's fates on one hand, and then you have the people in power that are playing games on the other.
These scenes of excess and hedonism, this king he can just do whatever he wants, and it's that kind of like classic, effeminate, flamboyant royal figure who has so much power that he doesn't know what to do with and can just get away with anything. I think there are a few scenes of like that really blunt cross-cutting. There's another scene I think later where I can't remember what it's cutting to, but there's the scene of Grandier and his wife, who he's secretly married, kind of in bed. I think it's possibly they're cutting between that and one of the scenes of like sort of sexual excess. But I don't know. There are a few moments of like, yeah, just the really stark juxtaposition in the editing.
One thing that's definitely true certainly in every Ken Russell film that I have seen is, and I think you either respond, favorably to this or not. But he isn't really capable of putting movies together that don't draw a lot of attention to the technique of the cuts and stuff. Like he's very bad at sort of natural coverage and natural cutting.
I also believe that there's just a desire in all of the films that I've seen. I've not seen his like BBC television like dance documentaries and artistic. He did a lot of stuff before he started making feature films. But there's a desire, at least in all the feature films that I've seen by him, he just has a go for broke style.
Yeah,
and I think as his career went on, his budgets went down. Like the last kind of film of any size that I saw by him was probably Altered States in the early 80s, and then everything after that seemed smaller. But in The Devils, my lord, he has that huge white set.
Well, the convent is crazy.
It is so fantastic to see the scenes of plague with all the ugliness and makeup and vulgarity that when someone dies of the bubonic plague, against that white tiled background of the
I think what they were going for. I mean, all the sets were done by Derek Jarman, and I think what they were going for was that Aldous Huxley, the movie's based partially off his novel, said that he wanted to feel like you were in a washroom or in a bathroom. So they used white tile for a great deal of the sets, and it does have that kind of pristine, kind of clean feeling, but also really kind of grimy at times too. Like you are actually in a washroom stall.
The setting was kind of eerie, I found. Like a lot of the town walls and the architecture looked. I mean, I don't know what Loudun looked like in this period, but it almost looked to me like a vision of like the future, like a kind of how cheap films in the 60s and 70s, like I think of something like Woody Allen's Sleepers, depicts the future. It had this like just very kind of unnatural, surreal vibe to it at times.
I'll go you one further, Tom. This movie looks more like Zardoz than it looks like Tom Jones.
I was thinking, I know that Russell did, he did Tommy, right? But The Wall is another film. Like there's the scene with Richelieu and his crony, the Baron Lombardmont or something like that, and they're in his Catholic stronghold or whatever, and it is a prison. Like the film was clearly shot in a prison, and it has this giant red cross. It just screams 70s rock opera to me, even though there's nothing in the sense otherwise to indicate that, but the set designs are big and garish.
Well, Rogue also directed performance, right? So there is a sense of rock theatricality that I think he's...
Well, that's Rogue, right? This is Russell. And
yeah.
while those
sorry.
Those two filmmakers are so easily confused because they both do a lot of the same thing. Every now and again, I catch myself doing the same thing. We haven't talked about Sister Jean, Vanessa Redgrave's like crazy deformed nun. And what always makes me laugh is Michael Gothard's like rock star exorcist with his priest power gloves. Like, I love that.
With the John Lennon glasses? That guy's
and
awesome.
The John Lennon glasses. The movie's kind of going along in some sense of normalcy. I mean, even, with the convulsions of Vanessa Redgrave and everything else, until he arrives. Then the movie gets just nutty. I basically, by the time you hit the first enema, there it is.
I just want to go back to the sets just for a second, because Tom, you're mentioning how it seemed like almost futuristic. I was reading a bit more about the film, and what Ken Russell was trying to do was actually create a city that, at the time, the people who lived there thought that it was a modern city. He said that whenever you see period films, it's always the crumbling walls. But they weren't always crumbling walls. They were actual walls at some point. So we tried to build a city that would have been modern at the time. And I think you're right. It does actually then come across as almost futuristic as opposed to what we're used to seeing in, Renaissance era type movies or period movies.
And I wonder if if that reflects all the way into a lot of the people into the town, because there's several scenes like during the public exorcism, during the public trial, where you have a lot of the mid-level aristocracy witnessing it, and they're kind of laughing at it and not taking it particularly seriously in a way almost like a poser cosmopolitanness. Like they're thinking they're being more big city by treating, like they're above it all or whatever, when this, theater of the absurd is going on in front of them, rather than being offended or horrified by that. The one thing I have trouble with the movie is that I can never distinguish when it's like the baker and the sort of level-headed people. There's very few of them. But the movie kind of wants to say that the city is very level-headed because it's the one place where the Catholics and the Protestants exist in a roughly equal ratio and seem to get along. But then it also goes out of its way to say that everyone in this town is nuts. So it's very hard.
Well, the plague has a lot to do with that too, right? I mean, especially at the end. Spoiler alert: when Grandier gets burned at the stake, they're all kind of cheering and whooping it up. These are people who've been living with the plague and are used to people dying all over the place. That they've kind of almost given up caring about people.
That's an interesting point. I've never considered it that way, but I guess death would be pretty cheap. Yeah.
But you do make the point about the other set, the aristocracy that sort of goes and watches these nuns kind of freaking out and are laughing and enjoying it, and that's a little bit different. But I think it's based on I guess some true events where these nuns actually were kind of a sideshow. They actually did essentially kind of perform for audiences who'd come in and watch them, flail their arms and get naked and have the demons exorcised from them. So they almost became kind of like rock stars in a very kind of small sense. So I think Ken Russell's really playing up all those kind of facets.
I think he's just predicting the rise of Cirque du Soleil. But
man, he got it pretty good then.
He almost got it perfect.
Are they ever going to do a Cirque du Soleil where a woman masturbates a candle?
If they do, I may finally buy a ticket for Cirque du Soleil. Here's my question on a more serious level, and I don't know, Bob, you might be able to speak to this because you mentioned you were doing some reading about the film. But to me, when I said at the top that I thought it played more for me as a cultural artifact, I think part of what I'm talking about is that the movie feels very consciously, and not just in the fact that its content dictated that it would absolutely get censored, and I don't think Russell for 1 second didn't think that it would.
Definitely there are scenes in the film that are like asking for it. Like they are there
for sure.
And a fan.
I guess what I'm saying is, how much do you guys think the movie is really... I mean, it's obviously you choose to make a movie about something for a particular reason at a particular time. 1971, the UK, there has to be a fair amount of... if you think about it, like the UK is sort of lagging a little bit behind the States in terms of Summer of Love and revolution in sort of personal morality and stuff like that. And to me, the reason it plays as a cultural artifact is because it really points up that that's a pretty cataclysmic time for people to sort of reconsider what's acceptable.
Yeah, I think
and that's what the movie seems to partially be about, is this idea of like casting off or being crushed down by moral kind of, overlordism from above.
Oh, for sure. I mean, it's man against the establishment in a lot of ways. I mean, and that's... I think I read a quote somewhere saying that's kind of Ken Russell to a T, so it's almost about himself in some ways. He's always been against the establishment. But I think around that time, the British censors were, oddly enough, pretty reasonable. They were actually considered to be fairly progressive in their views, especially one of the lead censors, I forget his name now. But I think when he did see the initial cut, he was very, very particular about certain scenes that were just not going to cut it, because that was, like I said, it was just already beyond the pale, anything else that had come out around that time.
Well, this is on Wikipedia, mind you, but I believe I read that it was actually more harshly censored in the States than it was in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if that's accurate.
No, that's very accurate.
Yeah.
And this is what happened. The British censors said, well, just trim a little here and trim a little there so you're just not lingering so long on things. Just very minor edits. The United States, when it got exported, it said, remove all instances of pubic hair. I think the British censors tend to take a more approach of how can we massage some things out of the film without compromising the film, and I think the American censors take a more of a checklist approach. We got to cut this, we got to cut that, and fix it however you can after we've cut all of these sort of little things. And so but
it's the inverse in actual society. The British censors were probably more liberal, but I feel like the British society was probably not as forward or not as far along that chain.
We're definitely getting right into the new Hollywood cinema at this time in the United States, and any sort of rules are gone. It is fascinating that The Devils was as hit as hard as it was by Warner Brothers in 1971, and then they let The Exorcist out of the gate in 73, where...
Well, there's no pubic hair in it.
Yeah, but you do have a child masturbating with a crucifix. I mean, that's...
The Exorcist is quite a violent film, but this was a lot more sensual.
And I
you know what I mean? And I think that's why it gets the censorship.
I think
you're exactly right. Yeah.
The Exorcist also has kind of clearly good guys and bad guys in kind of the regular roles, and this movie is, really going after the corruption of the state and the co-option of religion.
There's no part
in The Exorcist, the priest is the good guy,
Yeah,
so
there's no part of you watching Regan masturbate with that crucifix where inside you're kind of like, yeah, all right, let's get that. There's a certain amount of that in The Devils where there's kind of there's some pretty,
Nuns Gone Wild
stuff that you're kind of like, all right, humpbacks, let's do it.
Well, I thought the nuns was really really interesting. The Vanessa Redgrave character makes the point early in the film that a lot of the nuns, and again I assume there's historical basis to this, that a lot of the people who are in the nunnery are kind of from upper class women whose families didn't have quite enough money to marry them off, or they weren't attractive enough to be married off. So these women aren't necessarily pious people who really wanted to devote their life to God. They're just people who didn't really have any other options. And so when they get the chance to kind of throw the habit off and, get into this ridiculous orgy, because they're feigning being possessed by devils. And at times the film kind of blurs the line of how much of this is them acting, how much of this is them maybe believing that they're possessed, how much of it is them just finally being liberated, sexually liberated after all this repression. So I thought that while the sort of orgy sequence is extremely excessive and is definitely there to shock, it definitely kind of serves the narrative as well. It wasn't entirely gratuitous.
Well, I do think that there's a pretty interesting scene, and this might be the scene that you're talking about with the cross-cutting with the wedding between Oliver Reed's Urban Grandier and Gemma Jones. But there's the scene where the like super priest, the exorcist guy, Father Barre, and the Baron have all of the nuns tied up out in the forest or whatever, and they kind of thinly say, "Okay, ladies, you are going to do this, or we are going to kill you. You are either possessed, or we will kill you right now." And it's kind of this unspoken political will being thrust on these ladies to perform the way they are. And then that, what Bob was saying earlier, where they became kind of a tourist sideshow. I believe when the king comes in with all of his people, they are coming to actually witness that sideshow, because that sideshow has gotten traction even within the limited time frame. Because when you see them in the church there and everyone's going nuts, it is theatricality. And I love that the king, who you think is kind of this unaware, foppish guy, he does actually pull a pretty slick little scam on everyone as if to restate his authority above the church, and with where he presents the empty box as this box has a vial with the blood of Christ, and it gives the effect that he wants, and then he opens it up and it's empty. And that, I think, the actual caught in your lies, that sort of personal reaction, that's when people really go nuts. They ain't faking that. That's when everyone's caught and you don't know what to do. Everyone's just embarrassed to be caught in this compromising situation. So then the nuns go, everyone just goes absolutely nuts.
Well, yeah, and the witch hunter Barre just redoubles his efforts. He just, like you said, he just goes for it now.
And that's the point where there's a lovely scene, because Oliver Reed, who's been off to petition for the town's walls to stay up, and he's been acting more a politician than a priest, and he comes back in, and he, for 1 minute, he is undeniably the voice of reason. There's this woman, and she's got like crosses, she's got her head shaved and she's naked and she's got crosses painted on her face, and he almost grabs her like and calms her and gives a lovely speech. And that's, to me, where the movie is maybe not exactly what Matt said earlier, where Ken Russell just doesn't know how to tell a story. I believe that there is a control of tone. It's not just throw everything at the wall and see what sticks, because you do see Grandier and the way he's shot for the rest of the film, there is a serenity to his martyrdom at the end, and it's quite powerful the way they do that. Like even his court scenes, like it's like everyone is stuck on this road now to burning him at the stake, but he is getting closer to God in his personal journey.
Yeah, I don't think Russell is unable to tell a story. I don't think he really necessarily wants to or cares that much.
That wasn't what I said, but go on.
Well, I think my point there is, and I want to say this earlier, is that there's a quote that said that Ken Russell doesn't necessarily believe in the inherent virtue of understatement. He doesn't think that, oh, it's subtle, that must mean that it's good or it's better. He believes in almost the opposite. I'm going to give everything to you full bore, I'm going to concentrate on the image, and that's going to get across my point. And I think the way he does it in this movie is fantastic. Other people try it, and I don't think they get anywhere near the results that he does in this particular film.
So just to quickly clarify, I think I didn't state my point very well. I wasn't saying that he's bad at it. I was saying that inherent to his style is a sense of making you aware of his style.
That's a fair statement, I think, yeah.
So that's what I meant. That when he cuts from a person to another person, I'm always aware of the cuts. And I don't think it's definitely deliberate.
And you're also aware of why he's doing it as well. Like when he's doing those juxtapositions, it is. I mean, I don't want to say, like, if I say it's really on the nose, that sounds like it's a criticism. I loved it in this film, but it's really obvious. Like when he's juxtaposing, the violence with the serenity. When he's juxtaposing, Grandier's kind of St. Crispin's Day speech with the foppish king in this scene of utter excess. Like, it's really clear what he's doing. And he doesn't make any mistake of that.
There's an awful lot of stuff in this movie that sort of the subtext is, I may have gone to art school.
Well, again, because it's political and spiritual theater, I believe that's part of the reason for the largely theatrical direction. And if it wasn't intentional, it was just a happy marriage of material. Like, you can treat it in that way as well.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a contemporary of this, but it feels a lot like the play Marat Sade, which I don't know if you guys are familiar with that play, but it's a play set in an insane asylum where they're putting on the life of the Marquis de Sade in the asylum, and it's just they're contemporaries in terms of timing. I think they're both come out of like late 60s, early 70s.
Well, one tends to wonder whether or not, because of the martyrdom aspect of the movie, if Russell was also playing a bit on the pure image of the Dreyer Passion of Joan of Arc, like again, Loudun, by virtue of its white sets and clean sparseness of many scenes, feels a lot like that film, but only in scenes. It's certainly not like it all the way through, but there are...
But certainly the image of Grandier after because through the whole film, he's got this very, like, he's got the mustache and this head of hair, and he looks like his character. He's kind of this rash character. And then you see him later where he's been completely shaven, and he looks a lot like the character from in the Joan of Arc. So I think that's, whether that was an intentional, whether that was a influence Russell directly took, I definitely picked up on that as well.
Now, the reason why, in my mind, I paired this film with Possession is because they both have women at the core of the film that are truly and utterly hysterical. We should really talk about Vanessa Redgrave's. It's an over-the-top performance, but again, I think it's the right performance for this movie. But she is nuts with her body language and her posture, and this was fairly. I know her. She comes from a very famous acting family, but this was fairly early in her career, and she is in go for broke at this thing right from the first shot, where you see her with the hump and her body contorted to the side, and just that image. And then she's on her belly watching Grandier as he leads a funeral procession early on in the film. But normally she's in a nun's habit, which leaves the rest of her body expressionless. So she has to do everything with her physicality and her face. And my lord, does she ever get it right. I find her performance very unsettling. Maybe as a guy or as a human being, I don't know. Her performance is not sexually intimidating. It's just like when someone has gone that far, you just want to back away slowly. And I feel that I do that mentally when I'm watching this movie. Like, she is as crazy as most people are in this film. I think she takes the cake on this one.
She went over the top down the other side and tried to come back up. I mean, I think it works perfectly well with the tone of the movie. And yeah, it's early on in her career, but I think she was already quite well known and thought of to be one of the best actresses of her generation, but maybe not quite as known from a film perspective, more like on stage, I think.
Well, she's also, a lot of her early career is a reaction to not wanting to be her sister. And she tended to go for, I think, more extreme stuff like this because Lynn Redgrave is this more kind of, she's a Georgie girl, and it was just more kind of like an accessible career, right?
I wish we had a lady on this podcast to kind of come at this from, because I don't think it's a flattering. Now, most characters in this film, the film is not flattering to any of them except for perhaps Grandier, but.
Well, and Gemma Jones's character too. She's really the only.
I guess she's
almost normal person in the film.
Yeah, she's kind of the naive. I guess she's naive, or played at least in a counterbalance. Both of the scenes with her and Redgrave are fantastic. The first scene where Redgrave is just haughty and superior to her, and then the second scene when
she attacks her.
She knows that this has happened, and it's just not pretty, the confrontation between the two.
Well, I just want to get back to Oliver Reed for a second. He's kind of known for, well, a variety of things. His performances are usually kind of big. I really love him in this movie again. I think it's one of his best performances that I've seen anyway. Another thing I read was that Russell is not really known to be an actor's director. So with Oliver Reed, he really just gave him one of three commands. He said, Moody 1, Moody 2, or Moody 3, meaning I want kind of a normal Oliver Reed mood, then I kind of bring it up, and Moody 3 was just do whatever the hell you want. And you can tell in this movie when he's told him Moody 3, there are moments where you know that he's just said, all right, Oliver, do whatever the hell you want. And I love those moments.
He gives him some big, good movie speeches, and often movie speeches are kind of not my thing, it's just a little bit overly much, but he has a couple good ones, and even in his kind of, when he's not necessarily monologuing, but when he just has one big line in the movie, when he says, I could never be Satan's boy, the word, just the way that sentence plays out is quite...
I think my favorite scene from him was the scene in the, when he's taking confession, and that definitely had that level of, absurd humor to it as well.
Yeah.
In this,
and the fact that they're taking the confessions just out in the open.
Yeah, I know.
They haven't come up with the innovation of the little box.
Yeah.
That's all.
And he yells at...
There was a pillar there, Matt. Come on.
He yells at the baby to, keep it down when the baby starts crying.
Well, and that's what makes it funny, because the speech because he's actually blowing off this other woman. And right before he's blowing off this woman, he was talking to Gemma Jones, and he says something like, if God wants you to suffer, you should want to suffer, and you should accept that gladly. And yet he's pissed off that a baby is crying in the church. That's definitely before he's come into his own spiritually. He's a little petulant.
A little.
So I don't know if we should wrap up on The Devils, if we want to go around the table with final thoughts or something that we haven't touched upon that you would like to talk about.
I think I've covered what I wanted to say. I mean, I really love the whole, the film begins with what's the name of the sort of major overarching antagonist, the cardinal who has the ear of the king?
Cardinal Richelieu.
Anyway, Richelieu. That character kind of talking about how he wants to bring church and state together. And so that's immediately, the theme of the film. And I just think that's just...
terrifying aspect of the whole movie right there.
Yeah, and it's sort of the film definitely has some still resonates to this day, I think, with some of the concepts that it's throwing around. The other thing I want to touch on is some of the imagery, specifically the wheels with the dead Protestants strapped to them, just kind of really haunting but also slightly absurd. It was a real we spoke about Monty Python. It had that kind of Holy Grail it's really ridiculous, but also really disturbing and vile at the same time. I just thought that some of the imagery was really
I believe
remarkable.
the final shot of the film is Gemma Jones, now widow, walking out of a broken city that absurdly fell because they were focused on their sideshow, and she's just walking, and you see a bunch of those death wheels and just an endless road into the wilderness.
Exactly. I mean, and you spoke about her being the one innocent, naive, pure character in the film. I mean, again, that image of her a broken woman, her husband's charred bones are being swept away, and she's walking out. That really is the loss of innocence. If an ending ever kind of summarized that theme, it's pretty again on the nose in that final shot.
Yeah, and the one character like that is the one that now leaves the city. So
yeah.
Yeah, I love all that imagery too. It's interesting. I'd read one more thing about Terry Gilliam saying that they weren't actually influenced with the Holy Grail from Ken Russell's movie, but he said it's kind of a shame that they weren't. So they're obviously fans of his, but I think we all thought that with the Bring Out Your Dead, that, obviously Monty Python picked up on that, but apparently they didn't.
I don't think they necessarily picked up on it, but I just think we're now colored in the way that we...
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. I think the only thing I would add to all of this is, because we didn't really touch on it, is that again, coming back to this idea of a cultural artifact or whatever, the film obviously, I'm very glad I saw it. I don't necessarily think I'm compelled to watch it multiple times, but I think just in the sense of viewing it as a kind of ur-text for, there's clearly a lot of it in later Terry Gilliam films, and oh my God, there's a ton of it in Peter Greenaway's stuff.
But I find my personal taste. I find Russell's just unrestrained. Greenaway, he's just being an asshole about it. I just get this.
Well, but
my personal reaction to Mr.
individual
Greenaway.
Personalities, but I mean, in terms of stylistically, like it's clearly been incredibly, influential. Probably more so than any other Russell film that I've seen. Like there's tons of pretty strong images in it that clearly filtered out over the next 30 years of kind of theatrical movie making.
Yeah, I actually can't wait to see it again, to be honest. And I need to find the DVD. If it ever comes out on Blu-ray, I'll buy that in a second. I want to sort of touch back to one of the reasons why Kurt chose this being kind of a horror movie. There are definitely not just horrific images in the movie, but just horrific concepts. We already touched on one of, the combination of church and state, the balance between the Catholics and the Protestants, the plague, the imagery of the Protestants and the wheels. There's a lot of that pops up in the movie. There's no, genuine scares. But by the end of the movie, you're, if not terrified or shaken in your seat, you're kind of maybe rocking back and forth a little bit. At least I felt that way, that this was, in my mind, a horror film. I don't think Ken Russell sees it that way at all, from what I read. But it worked as a horror film for me, absolutely.
Politically, if I can bring up the Star Wars prequels, because they should be in context of this. But the only line I really like in the entire 3 Star Wars prequels, as blunt as it is the line of, "Oh, this is the way democracy ends," to thunderous applause, and watching the city of Ludon utterly fail to hit what is politically in their best interest in favor of cheap spectacle. I mean, you can apply that to the Romans, you can apply it to modern America, you can apply it to any society for far enough along, and I find that to be perhaps the ultimate horrific element to this movie. That's what gets me when I watch it.
They have the walls being demolished in this like explosion. They have charges and they blow up the walls. Literally, moments after he succumbs to the flames. So and even as I was watching it, I was thinking practically that probably wouldn't have happened the exact moment. It just didn't it would kind of seem silly. But again, in terms of making the point about these people have lost their way, they've thrown away the one person who can help them, and now immediately their downfalls come about. I agree that it's that thing of it's very on the nose, but he really is making that point as hard, as forcefully as he can.
I'm the only one who didn't find it horrific. The idea that human beings are awful and do everything wrong is just absolutely what I expect.
Well,
it's only when they miraculously do something right that I'm horrified.
I mean, I do find it disturbing, but there's also an inevitability to it as well. You're not really surprised that the movie goes in the direction that it does, and you kind of know from pretty early on that Grandier is going to lose. Even when the king shows up and kind of reveals the scam, you sort of hope maybe, oh well, they've been revealed as jesters, it's not going to go any further. But that scene doesn't really have any impact. It's just the king kind of playing a prank, and then he leaves, and they go right on with the show. And so there is that kind of I agree with Matt in that sense of human beings are going to do terrible things to each other. They're going to pick the wrong option. They're going to, shoot themselves in the foot. And yeah, the film never leads you to believe that things might end up okay.
Well, Kurt, you know what? I'm also on record in the past as having said that anytime more than 8 people agree on something, it's clearly a bad idea.
Yeah.
So
that reminds me of one other thing, and then I'll sum up on my side. But the other thing is they do set up in the first act Grandier making as many enemies as possible, and the scene that the 8 people agreeing on something is done in a strange football huddle. I find the scene in Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, where Jack Nicholson is up against the freezer door and the camera's looking up at him. It's rarely used in film. So anytime I see that kind of shot, it always...
Yeah.
And it's always a prelude to madness. Like that scene can only... And you get all of them. The Baron, the Exorcist priest. We never talked about that great faced Father Mignon, the confessor for the Ursuline Coventry, and the two doctors who have been spurned by Grandier. And so he's made as many enemies as possible, and they are the 8 people that agree on something, and it ends pretty badly for almost everyone. But I guess my final thought on this movie is it's fascinating that the sexuality of men in this movie, or Grandier's proclivities that eventually lead him or put him on the path, intentionally or not intentionally, towards enlightenment, and then that is utterly contrasted with the sexual proclivities of the women in the film that only leads to like a pain sensuality. Like when Oliver Reed is killed at the end of the movie, his pain gets him to nobility. When the women are tortured and whatever in this movie, their pain is manifested in sexuality. Only a man would write that as opposed to a woman. So for all of its kind of maybe progressive or controversial things that The Devils does, it still kind of reinforces some pretty ugly gender stereotypes. Not to turn this into a women's lib class, but
not to segue too hard into the next film, but I actually think that's the linkage. Both films seem like they're really about women, but holy mackerel, are they misogynist in their own way? Like.
Okay, so well then that segues into Possession, and as easily or as clumsily as I tried to summarize The Devils, I think Possession is much harder to summarize. I know on my first viewing, I don't even know what I watched. Plot-wise, as best as I can tell, a very young Sam Neill is working in West Berlin, presumably as some sort of spy, and he comes back from wherever he was spying, probably East Germany, and he finds his wife at the doorstep of their apartment, clearly ready to break up with him for reasons that he doesn't understand. So they immediately set to fighting about that. She remains irrational. He just wants logical answers, even though he's flipping out himself. He finds out that she has not one other lover, but possibly a second other lover, which isn't even human.
I was going to say 1.5.
And but basically, the movie is the evolution or devolution of both of them as they fight with each other. Just how mean and brutal and hysterical a couple can fall apart. And much like The Devils, Andrei Zulawski does not restrain any scene in this movie. This is possibly the least restrained movie I've ever seen, period. It morphs into a horror movie for a while, or a creature feature, and then possibly an action movie by the end, before becoming a science fiction apocalypse. So you are getting kind of a multi-genre movie, but at its heart, it's a relationship collapse. And so yeah, let's go around the table again, and tell me what version or how you saw this movie, and what you thought of it.
So for me, again, the first time I'd seen it, and certainly requires a bit of processing. It sort of defeated me in like a plot sense in terms of what is going on. Kind of difficult to follow in terms of like where a character's headspace is in any given scene. Then the next scene it could be completely different. The thing that kind of kept me in the movie was the relationship element. Obviously, the film has horror elements and certainly has body horror, kind of a Cronenberg. It reminded me of The Brood in a lot of ways. I guess I wasn't a huge fan of the film just purely because I don't think it quite works on a relationship collapsing level, because it feels like the relationship is already collapsed. Like, we come into the film and it's already collapsed. But probably get more into that after other people talk about their experiences with like viewing.
It was my first time seeing it as well. Saw it on YouTube, unfortunately, because I couldn't track down a copy. But it was over 2 hours, so I don't think much was cut from it. I gotta say, I love this film as well. Do I fully understand it? No. I didn't really worry about that, though. I think at some point I just kind of gave in to the way that everything was being expressed, the absolutely not just melodramatic, but the super melodramatic way that all the scenes were done. I mean, it's essentially about divorce, a really, really bad one, as two people actually destroy each other and then sort of build up almost their perfect images of what they wanted from the other person by the end. And also just the way that the term possession sort of comes in and out in different ways, you know, with the walls of Berlin, with the way he wants to get all his questions answered from her. There's so many different aspects that it's just something I think I could chew on for many, many moons, and I enjoyed the crap out of it.
Ironically, the film is going to play in Toronto in about a week, and I actually am probably going to go back and see it a second time in a decent print on a big screen. I think I also saw a fairly complete version. Now, I did see it on DVD, and I will say that at least in the version of the DVD that I had, the transfer itself is rough. Like, that movie does not look particularly sharp or good.
Was the aspect ratio, I think I know the DVD you're talking about, was the aspect ratio not perfect? Like, it was a little stretchy?
No, that seemed okay. It just was like very low resi kind of looking. And to the point where there's that opening scene where he gets out of the car drives up, he gets out, he's got his bags, and in my head I thought, this looks like a cutscene from GTA 4. Like, they're all kind of blocky and like anyway, I got past it almost right away to the content of what was happening, but it's not a great transfer of the movie. I think the thing that struck me just thinking about it afterwards is, I mean, it is obviously his reaction to his own divorce. And when I said, I wasn't really even being facetious when I said, this guy's a misogynist, he hates women. He does. The thing that struck me really strongly is, this is a movie by a guy who does not understand why the fuck his wife doesn't love the shit out of him. And he just is fucking mystified that any woman could have agency and go, not for me, sorry. And so his assignation is, well, she's obviously screwing an alien thing. There's no other reason. Like, I think he literally, on some level, he's like, her actions are random because, fuck yeah, it's random. Listen to how she's treating me. And it also fits really interestingly for me between 1 year earlier is Kramer versus Kramer, and 1 year later is the Jim Thompson, Linda Thompson album, Shoot Out the Lights. And as three completely different accounts of divorce, just kind of fascinating for me.
I love the way he brought in Shoot Out the Lights. I have to think about that. That's a nice trifecta right there.
Do you know what I'm saying? Like, they all, in their own way, are about almost the hangover from the sexual revolution of 15 years earlier, where now people are in these marriages that are clearly based on bad ideas, and they're getting out, and everyone's getting out and trying to deal with it in their own way, and it's essentially uncharted territory because people didn't, people who were getting divorced in the late 70s, early 80s were doing it out of marriages that weren't being put together for the right reasons in the first place.
I think he absolutely can be termed misogynist. I don't think he gets away scot-free either, though. It's not completely one-sided. Neil's character, I mean, he descends as well. He's absolutely not a perfect guy. I mean, the way he is trying to rein her and possess her as well is not exactly a ringing endorsement of the perfect husband.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, true.
They certainly both murder people on top of their other myriad sins.
Yeah.
There's no one in this movie that you would perhaps want to spend time with, but the person you would least want to spend time with ever is Heinrich's character, the savvy, bare-chested guru. I guess
I'm going to flail my arms for the rest of this episode.
Yeah, I could not get enough Heinrich. Every second of that dude is amazing.
You cannot get enough Heinrich watching it on film. If you had to deal with him in real life, it might be a different story. I
want to beat him for Halloween.
I came into this film fairly late. I only saw it in 2012 because I read this great book, which I encourage everyone to read, by Kayla Janice, called House of Psychotic Women, and it's a collection of horror movies that deal with women as being hysterical, being the main core of the horror film or whatever. Not surprisingly, possession gets the cover of the book. There's actually a really wonderful poster of because Zulawski's Polish and the Polish tend to make pretty good movie posters, and the movie poster that's on the cover of this book it's almost like just a simple line drawn with a naked woman with her hair like Medusa snakes, and the Medusa snakes are fondling her. It's a very provocative cover, and anyways, the book is fantastic and you should read it, but that's what pointed me in the direction of this, and then the Blu-ray came out, and I will also be there at Lightbox. I'm happy that it's screening in Toronto. In Montreal a few years ago, they had a 35mm print of it screening, but it was dubbed into French with no English subtitles, so it's kind of not the best, and the print was even rougher than the transfer that you're describing on that DVD. But anyway, I find myself compulsively watching this movie often, and I'm not entirely sure why, because it's kind of it's a movie that for me, it does drive me to distraction when I watch it. There are stretches of the movie that are, boring's the wrong word, but they're just so at odds with each other that it just feels like he's throwing random stuff at the camera.
Well, Bob and I were actually together last night, and we started kind of talking about it a little bit. And one thing that came up was it is pitched as a melodrama, but one of my sort of sticking points with it is that I'm not entirely convinced that Sam Neill's a good enough actor to actually pull off that high level of sort of performance where he's pitched way up high for most of the first half of the movie.
I don't know. I mean, the bulk of Sam Neill's career is playing guys that are just absolutely nuts. I mean, I imagine that this movie was the movie, because it came out early enough in his career, that got him, parts in like John Carpenter's In the Mouth of Madness and Event Horizon, and I mean, he just kind of, he does appear in artier fare like The Piano and various different things, but he loves to be in these just kind of off the rails genre movies. I mean, he started his career in that Roger Donaldson's what was it? It's like Sleeping Dogs or whatever. Like, it's an apocalypse movie.
Yeah, it's a technical thing, but although he does do stuff that's pushed out really far to the edges, he doesn't necessarily do. There's a certain amount of just acting technique that you need to bring to something where you're essentially shouting.
Well,
And
this movie has
I
that.
don't know that he has it.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you, Matt, but at the very least, I think he's consistent in the movie in how he pitches it really high and over the top. Right from the start, I felt the same way as you, Matt, where I didn't know what he was doing. Yeah, I thought, it's early Sam Neill. He's not really seasoned, but he stayed consistent all the way through the movie. And I kind of appreciated that. I like the fact that he had that same high-pitched tone all the way through. And by the end of it, I think it worked fine. But at the outset, I was a little worried about him.
The actress in the film,
Isabel
Johnny.
is... Yeah, I think she is so compelling.
Go for broke.
She like, whenever she's
Yeah.
on screen...
She's
And-
so much better than he is.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I'm not going to disagree with that at all.
But well, the dynamic they set up is that she is trying to run away, and he just wants to know he doesn't even know how to behave. Like she's the avoider, and he's the child. I mean, even though they have a young son in the film, but I mean, I don't think that's so unique. At the risk of sounding misogynist myself, I don't think that's such a unique situation. Like his attempts at rationality are more not rational. They're more like he's pissed off and he wants to hurt in his own way. Like there's a scene early, like that lovely scene in Cafe Einstein, where they're sitting at tables with this mirror bridging the two. I don't know if that's to hide the film crew, but it's a great image anyway. And they're both talking
Where they're not
away-
facing each other, yeah.
They're talking away from each other. And if you listen to what if you're not stunned by that rather unique framing, and you listen to what Sam Neill's saying, he's basically, well, fuck it, I'm not being a weekend dad. I'm out. Like, I'm not even doing a damn thing. And I don't think he means that, but I just don't think he knows what his role is. He doesn't know what to do.
Yeah.
And I think that may translate into you thinking Neil is not up to snuff when it comes to acting, because the character has to look so unflattering in a primal male way, like that sort of impotent emotional confusion that he can't even own it. He just lives in a state of denial of his raging kind of emotions. So I think that's ugly to see, maybe from another guy watching it.
Well, I thought he was pretty pathetic at times too, right? I mean, it's not that I felt sorry for the guy. It's just kind of...
He's like stomping his feet like a child. Like the
Yeah.
child is a really good way of describing it.
Yeah. Plus, I have to say, I don't know if you guys picked up on this or not, there are a lot of scenes early on in the movie, and the movie is clear. It's so clearly from before you ever see the creature or any of the sort of like the really outre stuff, there's this horrendous sense of dread that permeates the first half of this movie. And then he keeps putting the kid in the bathtub. And every time he put that kid in the bathtub, I was like, shit. That kid's going to die in the bathtub.
Well,
you know, like, it just messes with you because of other movies. And, like, having to, every time he leaves the bathroom, I was like, no, go back.
And I know what you mean about that sense of unease as well, because like it takes a long time to get into the horror, supernatural side of films. It's probably going for like 45 minutes before there's any hint of that.
Yeah.
But there is always something. There's clearly something. Just even in the way the characters are behaving, there's just something that's not right, and it is unsettling.
Yeah. Plus, it's no accident that Carlo Rambaldi is credited in the opening credits to kind of let you know, well, something's coming.
Yes. He is the guy who designed E.T., correct?
And the King Kong remake, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and isn't the credit like creature effects by
Yes.
or something like that?
Creature designed by.
Yeah.
And it's not like anyone's watching going, well, they obviously meant Sam Neill. Like, you know that.
Yeah, I suppose if they left that credit out, you'd kind of get that audition effect. If you've seen Takashi Miike's audition, where and this is a big spoiler for audition, but it has that where it's a family drama for a good chunk of the running time until it's not. And then it's something entirely else. And whereas that movie has its burlap sack, this movie has... I don't even know how to describe it. It's some sort of abortive birth epilepsy attack. Like, that is some serious craziness going on when Ajani is in the subway tunnel and loses her
can we just talk
groceries
about that scene
along
for a second?
with a lot of her bodily fluids against the subway wall. That's pretty...
We were saying before about how committed Vanessa Redgrave was to her sister Jean role.
On this.
Exactly. I don't think I've seen anybody do what Ajani does in this film. There's rumors that she even tried committing suicide after this movie. I don't know if they're true. I mean, I hate to even perpetuate that. But, oh my goodness, especially that scene in the subway tunnel.
Yeah.
That is phenomenal.
And I think that's what distinguishes her from Neil as well, because like they both get their opportunities to kind of flail around at points in the film, but like when she's like writhing around on the ground for like what, a good 2 minutes, it's utterly convincing and horrifying and compelling. And whenever he's sort of twitching or whatever, you don't bite at all.
That is one of those things where you're watching it, and initially you're like, this is going on a really long time, and then you're like, no, this isn't going on nearly long enough. This needs to keep going.
Well, yeah, your mood goes from that's disgusting to that's kind of funny to this is awkwardly continuing, and the horror comes later. Like, it's not... I don't think it's right at the beginning of that scene. It's because of the scene's length that it becomes horrific.
Yeah.
But I guess that's... I don't know if I'm completely accurate to say that is the real start of the supernatural element. There may be one scene prior.
I think it's...
I think you've seen the creature already by that stage.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we saw it on the wall before that. But, I mean... Given the nature of the film and the structure, that could very well have been a flashback. It's really hard to say at sometimes.
It's hard to say whether that scene even actually takes place.
Well, I guess that's kind of the delight of this entire movie, is that it's taking place in their respective headspaces, and that's why the tone changes. I love the sequence where there's several sequences where she's doing laundry or she's in the kitchen and she's just grinding meat. And it just goes on forever.
I know.
And it's
so uncomfortable. You're like, you know something's going to happen with that meat grinder, but when and what?
Yeah, it's yet another aspect, like the bathtub, like everything else, where you're just like, stop making me so goddamn anxious.
And again, they had the view of the camera looking up at the meat grinder, too. So
that was hard. That was hard. But it is that thing of, like, the tone is so kind of fluctuates that there were, like, moments where, like, whether that her convulsing in the subway station is a flashback or not, like, it did feel like there were scenes that could almost have been out of order, particularly the ones in the apartment, where a good chunk of the time spent in the apartment, they're yelling at each other, and they're kind of moving from room to room really quickly, and both acting quite bipolar, and avoiding confrontation and arguing and so on, and it was very hard. Like, I was confused as to, was she still living with him at a certain stage? Like, you get the feeling that months pass in between some scenes.
Yeah.
But you're not quite sure.
I think the kid actually does age. I don't know if it's the same actor or not, but there's a sense of that. I think that's by design, because it's supposed to be that fluctuating, because she has custody of him for a while. Then he comes home and finds the child very clearly neglected. Forget the bathtub. I find that sequence where he comes home and he's just covered in goop.
Yeah.
And he's clearly been like that for some time.
When was the last time you ate? Oh, it was weeks ago, yeah.
And then he actually takes custody over. But it's that when a relationship melts down ugly, it's that in and out of the apartment dynamic that I think this film really does capture well, of this is my space, no, this is your space, this is my space, and are you going to move your stuff out? And I mean, there is a scene where she starts gathering stuff, like as if to move out, but she's just making a bigger mess. And this movie does delight in making a mess of everything, even as it obsessively focuses on cleaning at times as well. Something I quite like in horror films is when it just takes mundane or banal domesticity and imbues it with an abject sense of horror, and I think this movie gets a gold star for that, particularly in the opening act. As soon as Heinrich and his creepy live-in mother relationship thing that they have going on, and starts happening, then I believe the whole Neil Ajani domestic situation kind of it falls off the table.
Here's the thing for me with Heinrich and his creepy mother. The rest of the movie does such a good job of being so completely from another planet in a certain way and being so pushed out and crazy that it actually prevented me from worrying about what would happen to the kid. But like, you know what I mean? Like in a normal, anything approaching normalcy, you'd be like, oh, that kid's going to be so screwed up. I didn't think that once in this movie because everything's so off kilter and weird, except for Heinrich and his mother, where for me that plays like a documentary of all German men. So, aren't they? Don't we suspect they're all pretty much like that? Weird, art school dropouts that live with their mothers and have crazy affectations and like.
Did anyone ever see the film May? Has anyone seen Lucky McKay's May?
No, I'd like to. It's supposed to be great.
But there's the actress in that,
Angela Bennett.
She dates. I think it's Jeremy Sisto plays like her boyfriend in that, and Sisto in that likes to watch Dario Argento horror movies, and he makes amateur horror movies, and he thinks that that's going to impress, and in a way it does. But Betty's character just goes so much further than where he is that it just makes him look kindergarten by comparison, and I find that. You think that Ajani went to Heinrich, like as he's got this spiritual thing down, or he likes art, or he doesn't mind doing recreational drugs or whatever. But she so quickly outgrows his little world and moves on to her headspace, which is so far beyond. And in a way, these movies, even though they're utterly different, feel like kindred spirits in that sense.
I was going to say, getting back to the sort of surreal aspects of the movie, there's a few scenes, I think, early on where Sam Neill's in the apartment, he gets a call from Heinrich, and then when he meets Heinrich says he never called him. There's a few moments like that where, getting back to what you were saying before, Kurt, where it's actually kind of pretty much in Sam Neill's headspace, where, is that event actually happening? Is that happening in his mind? It doesn't seem to follow the timeline of the movie. So I kind of like that about the movie, too, because you're never quite sure, was this actually happening in their relationship? What was actually kind of going on? Whether it was just, them breaking down or what? And that's why Heinrich, I think, was so kind of effective, because he was just always slightly off the beam, and then you realize he's probably drug addicted, but he still has that badass motorcycle as well.
I was going to say there's it seems very much in sync for me with kind of movie like Lost Highway. Like, it's very, like, people throw Lynchian around a lot, but this really does feel very much like, it's emotionally clear, but it's not logically clear what's happening. But there's a certain kind of emotional logic to everything that's going on that makes perfect sense, right?
When he meets up with the green-eyed Isabella Johnny, the boy's school teacher in the film.
Yeah, I can't believe we haven't talked about the doubles.
Yeah,
okay,
the doubles. But when he meets up with her, I don't for a second believe that the woman that he meets looks like his wife. I believe that's the film's way of projecting that on things. Like, I believe that's where the filmmaker is playing coy with reality, but being true to what you said, the emotional reality of the movie. And I think that there's several instances where that happens. Like, I do believe that the scene in the subway with Isabella Gianni, I think Tom was right in that it's edited out of order. Now, what the strategy of that is remains unclear to me, but I believe that she has that miscarriage that eventually grows into that creature that she's keeping in the other building. But you're right, now that I think about it, they do show a scene of that creature before then. There's weird dialogue that she has about faith and chance and kind of these long, incoherent monologues to me that seem to indicate that this miscarriage was the creature that she's raising, her own baggage or whatever. And I think the movie tries to explain that to you in some logical extent.
Yeah, I don't think there's a lot of logic. I mean, I think what Matt was saying is it's more about the emotion. I mean, she's struggling between this faith and chance kind of thing. I mean, should I just go with this? Should I actually force the issue? Do I have faith in my relationship? It's this kind of push and pull for her, and I think that's partially why she kind of descends into this madness, call it what you will. But even that monster, that creature that she grows in her apartment becomes the doppelganger of Sam Neill by the end. And he's the kind of perfect representation of what she was looking for, whereas the second, a Johnny character, the one with the green eyes, the school teacher, has got that very, virginal white kind of outfit, and she's wonderful when she comes out of the apartment. She cleans it, and she takes care of the child. That's his representation of kind of the perfect wife. So they both sort of, in this breakup of the relationship, find these doppelgangers to be like, this is what I was looking for, and this is what I, kind of aspired to.
But when they're two doppelgangers, maybe it's one of these, like, fate is just going to hand you that. When the two doppelgangers get together, they shoot each other. Like, even the two perfect images can't get along in this movie.
Well, that's like right at the end when, again, major spoiler, when the boy runs up to the bathtub to kind of throw himself into the water, and you hear all those kind of explosions in the background, like it's almost the apocalypse going off when these two doppelgangers meet. I'm not, I'd have to see it again to really see what he's trying to get at, but it's sort of this, if these two perfect images actually did get together, it's it's the end of the world.
It's a gatekeeper or a keymaster. We don't want it. You don't want to do that.
There's also this on a weird level, like when he shows up and he's turned into Sam Neill, and you realize, oh, okay, so the end point of this creature, which has been kind of metamorphosing, either through sex or through eating murder victims or some sort of combination of the two. It's never clear exactly what's progressing his sort of change towards the end state. At least for me, it wasn't. But when he shows up and it is Sam Neill, part of what I thought was, and I don't know if you guys have had this experience or not. Early on in my marriage, my wife said to me, "Oh, I had a dream last night that I was cheating on you with a guy that looked exactly like you."
No, I haven't had that, Matt.
No, but you know what? She's not the only person I've heard that from. I actually think that's more common than you would think, and I feel like there's something in there around that idea. Like we assign the person we wound up with a kind of fatalistic, like, well, this is obviously the person.
Well, absolutely. I don't know if I'm speaking out of turn here or if I'm going to get myself in trouble gender-wise, and maybe I'm completely wrong, but it seems to be the stereotype that when people have a dream and something happens into a dream, the guy just shrugs it off and forgets about it, but the girl blames the guy when she wakes up for something that had nothing to do with him whatsoever.
Okay, I might have had that experience.
Her anxieties that she now has to deal with, and you are you are now the projection of that. And I think that the movie is, in some way, tapping into this. I think there's no question whatsoever, as good as a Johnny is and as much screen time as she has and everything else, I think the movie is unquestionably about Sam Neill's character and from a male point of view, and that the director, writer is far better at articulating the male hang-ups with this than the female. I mean, I think it's an interesting movie, but it's undoubtedly a male movie, if that makes sense.
Well, it does a whole bunch of stuff, even amongst the sort of illogic of some of it. I've talked about this a little bit on my podcast, but Sam Neill is very good at his job, so you automatically have sympathy for him. He's a very good father. Like, he's very attentive.
Well, when he's there.
And when he's there.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd agree with that last point. I never felt he was engaged at all with his child.
Oh, I totally disagree. When he's engaged with him, he's very engaged with him. He's angry at her, so he removes himself from the house. But he's always shown to be like super tender with the kid and really like listening to him and like looking him in the eye and stuff. It's very like it's all, I think, very deliberately geared towards you getting on his side.
And I got the feeling that he only did that when he was really kind of forced to. I mean, even just I'm not going to be a weekend dad. Like he was just kind of like, he's throwing his hands up. Like, you know what? I'm not even going to do this. He's trying to rationalize it, saying, oh, it's going to screw the kid up. But, he never really looks at the larger picture. I don't know. I'd have to see it again to see if you're right about them trying to bring him into light as a good father. I didn't get that from him.
I think it's safe to say that these parents are rather ill-suited to be parents. Or what Matt was trying to get at earlier is that what is the foundation of this relationship? I understand you don't have a lot of early context to know, but you do feel that the relationship started from a physical sense, and it hadn't gotten much richer or deeper than that by the time we get to where we are. That's the sense I get, but maybe
I think wrong. Even Johnny even says like she didn't even really want the child. I think that's another thing that kind of almost possesses her, that forces her to stay there, is that, well, I've got this child and I have to be this mother character. And that's one of those push-pull things where she doesn't want to stay in a relationship just because of this child. So, yeah, she's not exactly a perfect parent either from that point of view.
We haven't talked about it, but I'm curious if you have any thoughts about the weird next-door neighbor lady.
Oh, is this Margie, the friend who
Yeah, the one on the
despises...
crutches. Yeah.
I don't know that I have any more thoughts on her necessarily. She was just like another baffling element, like yet another not particularly likable character in this whole in this tale. I think one of the things that I don't know if it has to do with the fact that the reason I wasn't able to latch onto the story as much as some of you other guys maybe is like I haven't had the experience of going through this turbulent, really messy, like a divorce or a really horrific breakup where you're kind of moving in and out of the same space. That I think you guys, I think it was Kurt who commented on how it really gets that dynamic of the apartment sort of down pat. That's maybe not something that I can relate to as much, and to me, I did just have that. It just seemed really bipolar to me.
Yeah, Margie was an odd character too. I mean, it felt like there was either a history between them, or there was this, overly antagonistic relationship that was going to eventually evolve into something sexual. That's sort of the feeling I got from her, where it was that not necessarily a temptation for Sam Neill. It was almost like, well, yeah, he's having his affair too.
Yeah, isn't there a shot with them waking up after having sex with each other in the film?
Yeah, I think so, and it's really is just like kind of.
It's just there. Well, I get it because the movie's so.
They're in the same bed, but have they had sex?
I thought it implied that. I just think that
I assume they had.
Because the film is so relentlessly from Sam Neill's character's point of view, I think in some weird way he finds that all the other characters are in some way sexually attracted to him. I think even Heinrich is sexual. It's just some stupid male thing of, well, of course, I am exuding manliness and whatever. And I think, and it's a fascinating thing that Matt mentioned earlier about Zulawski being so misogynistic. And I guess my question that I'd throw out is, do any of you think that there is it really just vitriol that he captured and projected up on screen, or is there a high degree of self-awareness in the movie?
Yeah, I would think there's self-awareness there. I mean, that's the feeling I got, just because I think the male characters don't exactly come across as wonderful either. I think misogyny is definitely there, but I have to think that he's purposely doing that, and he's aware that he's doing that. That this is spiteful at times, but also recognizing that maybe he had one or two things to do with the breakup of his marriage as well.
I mean, I think it's interesting as well, because when you're talking about something like misogyny, obviously you have such a misogynistic character in Sam Neill. I mean, he even has a speech about how you can't trust women at some point. So you kind of can't tell him, because it is from his point of view and he's kind of like the unreliable narrator, the degree to which, the way in which the women are presented in such a negative light. Is that because the film is itself misogynistic, or is it just because he views them in this misogynistic way? But certainly I think the two characters played by, I've forgotten the actress's name again, but certainly his wife and then the doppelganger teacher are these very, I don't think they're particularly positive women. There's his wife, who has kind of more agency, is this flighty, hysterical woman who kind of, you never know what she's going to do from one scene to the next. And then there's the teacher character, who's basically this, his ideal woman, passive, supportive, even when he's kind of acting aggressive towards her, she's very understanding and kind of laughs it off. And I mean, I don't think that's a particularly positive depiction either. But I think that's probably because it's coming from Sam Neill's character's point of view so much.
Yeah, I didn't get, to be honest, I didn't get vitriol out of him. It feels more like bewilderment. if that tracks. Like, I think he is angry, but it's more out of, like, even if you think about it in terms of, like, how he portrays Neil's character as kind of not perfect, and you could interpret it as, well, he's saying that the guys are just as equally to blame, or because they don't know what to do. But I think let's see if I can put this into sort of concise terms, but it feels way more to me like this woman is supposed to love me and she doesn't, which makes no sense whatsoever. And so I am going to say whatever I can think of, because honestly, I do not get this.
You get the feeling that it's stemming from his like frustration of not being able to deal with the situation.
Well, and I wonder if his like self-aggrandizement in his own mind translates into his job, because there's this, it's not a huge element of the film, but he does take a meeting early on in the film where he's like, I'm ready to retire from this position and I'm moving on.
Yeah.
And his employers are like, but you are the only one that can do this job. And there's no one will deal with anyone but you. It's like this ego, like that's what you want in an exit interview, to say, only you can do this. And then even...
And I kept waiting for that to come up again.
Well, it does. At the end of the film, it's like a weird kind of action chase movie with guys, with police officers with machine guns, and they get to go out like Bonnie and Clyde. Like it's still right up until the post-apocalyptic ending. It's still playing as a bizarre male fantasy.
Yeah.
And he almost comes across as double agent too, because he ends up talking to the man with the pink socks right at the end. It's like, well, wait, I thought that was the guy that you're supposed to be, trailing and giving information about, and then at the end you're talking to the guy. Well, so it seemed again like he's this perfect double agent spy dude.
That funny sequence at the end, and it just goes to show like the utter lack of restraint on anything. He can't just like let the guy walk by in pink socks. The guy has to have a little like rock in his shoe that he has to take it off, wave it in front of the camera. Not that it really terribly means anything, but yeah, he has to really.
But speaking of lack of restraint, I love the camera work in this movie too. I mean, it's almost this controlled frenzy at times, the way it's spinning around. I mean, there's that initial scene where that exit interview where the camera just does almost like a full 360 around that whole group of people. It's always kind of moving. I think the camera work here is absolutely fantastic.
And it really reflects.
Yeah, exactly.
It reflects their sort of state of mind really well, I think. Like, that chaotic, never knowing how someone's going to react. The constant... Like, again, when they're in the apartment, there's a lot of, like, rushing back and forth between different rooms. She'll go into one room and he'll kind of follow her to try and continue this conversation she's trying to get away with. And the camera work, yeah, totally, I would agree with that.
I think you just can't beat that. Let's just mount a camera on a rocking chair. It's ridiculous, but somehow... it seems to work. Like, it's just...
Yeah.
Like, not only is he when he's rocking in that rocking chair, he is rocking. Like, he's practically hitting the floor with the back of his head, and the camera is going the whole way. It just has that, again, Dr. Tongue 3D House of Slave Chicks thing going on.
Plus, you know, we haven't really talked about it, but the way he shoots the apartment that she's keeping for the creature... and the way he shoots the creature I think it's tremendous. Like, it's one thing to build that thing, but then to design those sequences, to use the eyes and to light it in that way and, like, get it to have that really icky, squiggly kind of feel to it.
I think it's the Foley. I think the Foley in those sequences is working overtime. It's got that...
Yeah,
it's almost like they brought in the Italians for
palette,
that.
Everything.
Well, I also think that apartment where it's set has a really calls to mind like Polanski films.
Yeah.
That has that dread, that eerie, and then like all the kind of like this weird aborted evil figure is like totally Polanski as well. But yeah,
well, the whole apartment,
really...
it's got that cold blue atmosphere to it. I mean, it really almost kind of represents their marriage, right? I think that's wonderfully realized.
You mean their personal
the place where they live?
Yes, yeah. Not the monster apartment.
It's fun to spot the separation or spot the doubles in this movie. It is so apropos that in this year, I don't know about the rest of you, but at TIFF there were several movies involving doppelgangers, and even at other film festivals I was at, I saw a Japanese film which was about, like, there's just a lot of films about doppelgangers this year, so it was kind of fun to drop that in, and I guess I'm well versed in the language of looking for that. So when I watched it this time, did you notice even their apartment complex is bisected by the courtyard in such a way that there's two buildings? It's fun to play, and then of course each of them have doubles, and I think there's a lot of
plus you haven't mentioned the fact that it's in Berlin, which is essentially two cities,
exactly.
Right?
Yeah, undoubtedly, and not only that, they live looking over the wall. Like the opening shot out of the window of the apartment, not only do you see East Berlin, but you also see guys guarding it. And I don't know, there's just something sinister about two guys standing on the wall looking into your apartment. Like it just... Yeah, that's undoubtedly, and it's not just that Zulawski at the time was going through a divorce, but he was kind of exiled from Poland as well. So I have read, and I certainly cannot extract it myself, but I've read other takes on the film where a lot of the Heinrich, Sam Neill conversations have a political subtext that I suppose if you were in Poland in the early 80s you might get, or maybe it's just very personal to the director. I didn't see any of that when I watched it, but I've heard it brought up before, or maybe people just wanted, because of the East and West Wall, they want to layer something on. But anyway, I just throw that out there.
Isn't there also a scene, that one scene where Johnny is a ballet teacher and she harasses that one girl, makes her cry, and she runs out? Then there's a scene later in the movie where, I forget if it was Sam Neill, I think it was a Sam Neill character, showing a gun to this young girl. And I think it was the same girl that ran out of that ballet room. Or, again, maybe it was a double of some kind. I don't know how that ties into it, but that was a very odd scene that just kind of jumped out at me as like, that girl must have shown up before in this movie.
Well, you brought up, or someone brought up The Lost Highway before, and maybe I can bring up Cachet in the sense that both of them involve videotapes dropping at the doorstep. And this movie has Heinrich. I believe that video that he's watching with the ballet is something that Heinrich had shot, and I don't know whether he's just terrorizing Sam Neill, but he drops that package off at his door. So then there's this, you're watching something deeply personal with this couple breaking up, and now he's going through her postcards and letters, and he's going through these videotapes, and I think I think some of the discomfort of this movie is that you're burrowing through people's exceptionally ugly parts of their being, and I suppose you're doing it for entertainment value or something, so I don't know if it's as aggressively condemning as Michael Haneke is often in his films, but I think that to a degree that sequence is supposed to play out like that. I don't, maybe I'm unclear on that, but I'll give you that the ballet sequence is that scene is astounding. It almost is like in a different movie. It's kind of shot better, and it just, I don't know. For me, that plays out as so quintessentially French. Like the way she's just cruel to... Like the French seem to specialize in a subgenre where a scene like that would fit.
There's also that thing where all good-looking French women who are above 25 all teach ballet.
that might be it. That might be it. But it is one of the rare scenes where you get Isabella Gianni's character not utterly hysterical. Like she's in control of her classroom, and maybe you disagree with her teaching methods. But she's acting as a somewhat functional member of society at that point, whereas at no point,
a cold and vicious one at the time.
Yeah, no point elsewhere in the movie is she like that. Maybe I'm just an idiot here, but I got the sense that it was like she was talking to herself in that scene. Like she says to the little girl, like, no one pushed me this hard, and maybe that's why I failed. It was almost like she was mentally reliving her childhood by now being the aggressor. And I guess anytime there's relationships and you have children and domestic violence and this, there's always a cyclical nature of these things. So I guess, I don't know if it's put in there to make you understand things any better. It's just another way of showing you iteration in the movie. Well, that was a pregnant silence. Should we?
I have nothing to add to that. That was a perfectly formed thought.
Should we wrap up with Possession? Is there? Should we go around the table one last time, or is there something very obvious that we've missed? Go ahead, Tom.
I'm just trying to think if there's anything else I want to add. I think it's sort of covered. I think just for me, there's almost like a disconnect between, because the tone's sort of all over the map in terms of like, well, not even the tone so much as like the genre kind of constantly changing and going back and forth doing this kind of like relationship breakdown, and then they never quite married together, sort of no pun intended, which is I think why I couldn't quite connect with the film.
For me, I actually thought this was a great pairing of movies because they're both horror movies that I think are horrific without being obviously stereotypical horror movies, that are both pitched very high, that are beyond melodramatic, and that just for me hit home in totally different ways. Ken Russell's The Devils, I love the storyline. I thought it was very clear, the message he was bringing. Possession is something I really have to see again to fully. I don't think I'll ever fully really get it, but as Matt said before, it's the emotion that's really big, and I love that about this film.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I think of the two, Possession is the one that I would, that does stay with me a little bit more. That does kind of go further than just being a curio and is actually like a viable statement on its own. But as weird bookends of the sexual revolution of the 1970s, the films are kind of interestingly paired together, I would say.
Yeah, I think I would classify both of these as some of the worst date movies ever. Like they're not like a litmus test movie for taking things out. But the one thing that I love about Possession, and that I also love about The Devils, is that they're dense. They're really dense, and they really reward multiple viewings. And both of them were made, well, maybe Possession's right on the cusp, but both of them were made when cinema wasn't in that home video VCR mode where people could obsessively watch movies over and over outside of repertory cinemas. And I think that while both of them have gotten a little bit of a kick in the last couple years back, a little bit of resurgence, they have their defenders and so forth, I just find it pleasurable to watch a movie that has this much excess but feel like you can watch it again and again and still be extracting things out of it. Like we could do this show again in a year and have totally different conversations, I'm sure, about it. It's not a suggestion. It's not a. But
set a date, man. Set a date.
Yeah, it's just one of those things that these movies have. I don't know if maybe I'm completely wrong, and maybe that's the question I can ask all of you on this. Do you think that there are cinema of today that are these movies both of their time? Like you were saying, they bookend the sexual revolution, but I don't know if there's anyone making movies this like id level, but still be in that kind of art house zone today. But I could be completely wrong on that. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that.
The first director that pops to mind, if you're talking about that, is maybe Cien Sono. Not necessarily his last film, that was just that TIFF, which was a lot of fun, but some of his previous stuff is really, he absolutely goes for it.
Like Cold Fish.
Cold Fish, exactly. That goes beyond both these movies in many ways. That's the only one that comes to mind directly, though.
I don't know. I think there's probably more. If you talk about,
I mean, Possession gave me a. Oh, sorry. I was gonna say Possession gave me almost like a Von Trier, like Lars von Trier.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Shades of that, I think.
Yep.
And
I just watched Nicholas Winding Refn's film Bleeder, and just in general, I think he's another guy that is connected in this way to this kind of filmmaking.
Well, I'm happily, easily proved wrong in that aspect. There are always nutty guys with some sort of vision being able to realize like a dense success on screen. With that, I think we will call that a show. I would like to go around the table one more time, and you can plug whatever you like to do, or just as a bookend to the show, tell people where they can find you in various social media and writing. I know we did it at the top of the show, but why not? Let's do it again.
So I'm at I'm all over the place. I'm at moviemezzanine.com, but easiest way to find anything, I write all over the place. So Twitter, Tom_Clift, and I'm pretty shameless in promoting where I'm writing at any given time.
Indeed you are. And I'm Bob Turnbull. I write for Row 3 and Eternal Sunshine of the Logical Mind. I'm at The Logical Mind, and currently in October I'm kind of going through a whole mess of horror movies and writing little bits about each one and screen capping the crap out of them.
And you can actually see in that both clips from Possession and The Devils in your recent one, which is quite excellent.
Thank you. That'll be up on Row 3 momentarily, hopefully.
And I'm at Matt Movies on Twitter, and part of the podcast Mamo. You can find pretty much everything I do under the umbrella site of mamo.ca. And as a coincidence to doing this horror-based thing, my most recent endeavor is to change my relationship to horror films. So there'll be stuff happening along those lines over the next probably year or so.
And again, my name is Kurt Halfyard. You can find me at Twitch Film. You can find me lurking around Row 3. And guesting on various podcasts around the internet. So that will be our show today. If you want to be keen, it'll be probably a few months before we get back together, but the next episode of the Movie Club podcast will feature two noir films, Sam Fuller's Pickup on South Street and Joseph H. Lewis's The Big Combo. So I hope you enjoyed this show, and I hope you join us next time. So thank you everyone who participated, and have a great evening. Cheers, fellas.
Hey, Tom, is it Thursday there?
Yeah, it's Thursday, like 2:30 in the afternoon.
Okay. I'm just. I mean, I'm morbidly curious about how this works on your end.
We used to have Omar come in from Iceland, and he used to do it at like 5:30 in the morning or something. Where
Oh, that would have been terrible. Yeah, I wouldn't be. If
No.
you guys switch the time around, I'm not getting up for that.
I think he was.
No.
It was right in the middle of Iceland's like full-on capitalism meltdown, and so it was like you had to stay awake because people might blow up your house.